train whistle had long since faded, leaving only the whisper of cold wind sweeping across the Montana plains. Clara Ray stood alone on the platform, a worn carpetbag clenched in her gloved hands. Her breath misted white against the late autumn air. But no wagon waited. No man stepped forward. She lowered herself onto a rough bench, the wood biting through her skirt. From her coat, she drew a letter, its edges soft with overreading. Harlan Cololton's words were etched in her memory. A quiet home, a warm hearth, a place for a kind soul to belong. But no Harlan had come. Laughter carried from the edge of the depot. Two young men leaned against a barrel, grinning. "There she is," one muttered, the half-blood bookkeeper, thinking she'd wed herself a rancher. Clara flinched, though the words were nothing new. She had lived under whispers all her life. Half-blood, savage, bastard. She had been abandoned 3 times before, each rejection sharper than the last. Once left at the altar, twice cast aside when the truth of her parentage surfaced. Her eyes blurred with tears. She had vowed never to cry in public, but loneliness pressed too heavy. Shoulders curling inward, she wept quietly, the letter crumpling in her lap. Then, soft footsteps. "Are you hurt?" Clara lifted her head. A little girl, no more than 3, stood before her. A wool coat swallowed her small frame. Mittens dangled from a string around her neck, and golden curls peeked from beneath a knit cap. Her eyes, wide and blue, studied Clara with solemn concern. Clara brushed at her cheeks, attempting a smile. "No, sweetheart, just a little sad." The child tilted her head. "Did your daddy say no?" Clara blinked. "No." "Do you have a husband?" Clara shook her head. "Do you have a baby?" Again she shook her head, whispering, "Nobody wants me." The child stepped closer, her mittened hand warm against Clara's glove. With a certainty only a child could carry, she asked, "Can you be my mommy forever?" The question froze Clara where she sat. Her lips parted, but no answer came. A lifetime of rejection pressed heavy on her chest. Yet this child, innocent and unknowing, had asked the one thing Clara had always longed to hear. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across the platform. "Junie," the voice was low and steady. Clara turned to see a man approaching. Broad-shouldered, coat patched, hat worn from hard use. He carried a small sack of supplies, one hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. His dark hair brushed his jaw, and his eyes, though calm, held a weight that came only from grief and years. The girl beamed. "Papa." The man nodded at Clara, his gaze flicking briefly to the crumpled letter in her lap. "Sorry, she's got someone?" Clara hesitated, the letter trembling in her hands. "I was, but it seems I've been fooled again." He studied her, unreadable, while Junie tugged at his coat. "She cried," the child announced. "She's sad." Clara's cheeks flushed, but the man only inclined his head. "You've no place to stay, then?" Clara tried for dignity. "No, but I'll manage." For a moment, he said nothing, only shifted the sack in his arm. Then, with the steady calm of a man who spoke only when he meant it, he offered, "It's cold. If you want a roof and some broth, you're welcome for the night." Clara blinked, startled by the unexpected kindness. "I don't even know your name." "Luke," he said simply. "Luke Harrison." He gestured to the path leading into the pines. "It's not far. You can leave after supper if you like." Clara looked down at Junie, who still clung to her gloved hand with surprising strength. The girl's touch was warm against the cold. Clara swallowed, nodded once. "Thank you." The 3 left the platform together, boots crunching over frozen earth. The sky dimmed to violet as they followed the path through thin pines and broken hills. Junie hummed softly, her voice bright against the quiet woods. By the time they reached a small cabin nestled in a hollow, the stars had begun to pierce the sky. Smoke curled from a narrow chimney, and the glow of firelight flickered faintly through the cracks. Clara stopped at the threshold, uncertainty anchoring her steps. "It's warm inside," Junie whispered, tugging her hand. Luke opened the door. Firelight spilled across the porch, casting a glow that felt, for the first time that day, like the promise of belonging. Inside, the cabin was small but neat, its walls of rough-hewn pine glowing in the firelight. A single bed stood in the far corner. A table with 2 chairs sat near the hearth, and a rocking chair rested worn and smooth. Everything spoke of a man who built only what was needed, and nothing more. Luke set his sack down on the table. "You can hang your coat there," he said, pointing to a wooden peg near the door. Clara hesitated, her fingers at her buttons, then let the coat stay wrapped around her shoulders. "I won't trouble you long." "That's up to you," Luke replied evenly as he stirred the pot over the fire. "But I didn't bring you here for forever, just the night." Clara flushed, but nodded. "Thank you." They ate in silence. Clara sat stiff, her gloves still on, while Junie chattered in, between spoonfuls, humming cheerfully. Luke said little, his gaze steady and unreadable. Clara wondered if he always spoke this little, or if her presence weighed down the air. It was then she noticed the corner of the room, behind a stack of pouch of sage. Clara's heart caught. She had seen such tokens before. They belonged to someone loved, not forgotten. "She was Comanche," Clara murmured. Luke's spoon stilled. His reply came quiet but firm. "Kiowa. Fever took her last winter." Clara bowed her head. "I'm sorry." He gave no answer, only placed another log on the fire. The flames flared, shadows dancing long against the plank walls. After supper, Clara rose. "Thank you for the meal. I'll be on my way." Before she could step to the door, Junie slid from her chair and clung tightly to Clara's skirts. "No, you said you didn't have a house. This can be yours." Clara knelt, smoothing the child's hair. "Sweetheart, this isn't mine." Tears welled in Junie's eyes. "It can be, just for a little." Clara glanced at Luke, unsure. His arms were crossed, his face unreadable. But after a pause he muttered, "She gets attached quick." Clara swallowed. "Then I'll sleep by the hearth, or in the barn just for tonight." Luke studied her for a long moment before giving a short nod. "You can take the cot. I'll sit up." Clara's eyes swept the room one last time. The quilt, the shelf of tokens, the fire that fought against the night. She realized she had stepped into a place built of grief and endurance, not unlike her own life. She told herself it was only for one night, but already something in her knew she would not leave unchanged. It began with a shiver. By sundown, Junie had grown pale and quiet, curling into the cot instead of humming as usual. By nightfall, her skin burned, her small body trembling beneath the quilt. Luke knelt beside her, panic written across his usually steady face. His rough hands, so sure with a rifle or hammer, shook as he pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. "She was fine this morning," he muttered. "Now she won't wake." Clara rose from the hearth where she had been sorting herbs. Crossing quickly, she laid her palm against Junie's cheek. Heat pulsed like fire beneath her skin. "She has a fever," she said calmly, "and it's bad." Luke stood, pacing. "We'll take her to town." "Not tonight," Clara replied firmly. "The roads are frozen. She wouldn't survive the trip." Luke's fists clenched. "Then what?" Clara met his eyes. "Let me help." His gaze wavered, torn between mistrust and desperation. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. Clara moved at once. She pulled bundles of dried roots and bark from her satchel, boiled water over the fire, and crushed herbs into paste. Her movements were swift, sure, the teachings of her Kiowa father, alone. The fever will break by morning. Luke crouched close, his voice rough. And if she doesn't? Clara did not flinch. Then we fight harder. The cabin sank into tense silence. Only the crackle of fire and Junie's faint moans filled the air. Luke sat rigid on a stool, eyes locked on his daughter. Clara worked steadily, changing compresses, whispering soft lullabies in a tongue Luke did not know, smoothing curls from Junie's damp forehead. After hours, Luke finally asked, "You've done this before?" Clara nodded, her voice low. "Twice. Once with a boy who coughed so hard he could not breathe. Another time with a hunter burning with fever. He lived." "You sound more certain than most doctors," Luke murmured. Clara gave a faint smile. "Where I grew up, no one came when we were sick. We had to be our own medicine." Luke studied her, his eyes shadowed. For the first time since she had met him, Clara sensed his guarded heart begin to shift. The night wore on. Clara never left Junie's side, wiping sweat, feeding tea, singing softly. Luke stayed close, silent but watchful, his whole being fixed on the fragile rise and fall of his child's chest. At last, sometime past midnight, Junie stirred. Her cheeks were still flushed, but her breathing had eased. She blinked weakly, reached for Clara's hand, and whispered one word, "Mommy," before sinking back into sleep. Clara froze. Luke inhaled sharply. "She doesn't understand," Clara whispered, shaken. But Luke's voice, low and raw, carried a truth she could not dismiss. "She knows what feels safe." Neither spoke again. Yet when dawn touched the cabin walls, Clara found a cup of coffee waiting on the table, freshly poured, set there by a man who had not said thank you, but meant it all the same. The fever had broken, but Clara remained awake by the hearth, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Junie slept heavily now, her small hands still clutched around Clara's fingers. Luke stood near the window, broad frame etched in dawn's glow, silent as ever. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "You did more for her in one night than most would have dared." Clara glanced up, startled by the rare acknowledgement. She gave only a quiet nod, unsure how to answer. Luke's eyes lingered on her. Folks like to talk about blood, whose it is, what it means. They act like it decides everything. His jaw tightened. "You believe that?" Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I used to hope it didn't matter. Thought if I worked hard, kept honest, someone might see me for who I was. But every promise ended the same." Her voice dropped, steady though threaded with hurt. "The first was a preacher's son. He brought me books, promised marriage. When he learned of my mother, he stopped coming. Sent his brother to tell me it was over. The second wrote letters, spoke of a ranch, a family. When mother turned me away, said he'd changed his mind. The third stood with me at the altar, placed a ring on my finger, and left me that very night. Said he couldn't share a bed with a woman carrying savage blood." She fell silent, her eyes on the flames. Luke did not rush to fill the quiet. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "People can be cowards," he said at last. Clara gave a sad, humorless smile. "Or cruel." For a while, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then Luke's gaze dropped, his voice low. "My wife knew that cruelty too." Clara looked up. Her name was Wina, Comanche. Quiet moon, it meant. His eyes softened at the memory. "She found me half dead by the river, nursed me back. I spoke no Comanche. She spoke little English. Somehow we built a life." Clara's chest tightened, recognizing the tenderness beneath his rough words. When I brought her to town, they stared, whispered, said she bewitched me, said our child would never belong to God. His voice hardened. Always the blood. Always the measuring. He turned away, staring out the frosted window. One winter, I left for supplies. Just 3 nights. When I came back, the door was open. Junie was crying under the table. They'd burned her blankets, smashed her toys, and they took Wina outside. His voice broke into silence before returning, flat and heavy. Said she was infecting the bloodline. Clara swallowed, her throat thick with grief for him. I buried her beneath the cedar tree, Luke said, his face etched with stone. After that, I chose survival over love. Love was something they could steal. Survival was all I could keep. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, Clara whispered, "I understand." Their eyes met in the firelight, and for the first time, neither looked away. No explanations, no apologies. Just 2 people bound by scars that mirrored one another. And in that stillness, something unspoken began to take root. Winter days slipped by with quiet rhythm. Clara stitched patches onto Junie's dresses, hung herbs to dry by the hearth, and read aloud from worn books when evenings grew long. Luke kept to his chores, repairing tools and tending traps, though his glances toward Clara had softened. What once felt like an uneasy truce was slowly becoming something steadier, though neither dared speak it aloud. Then came the afternoon that shattered their fragile calm. Clara stepped outside to shake a blanket free of frost, when silence struck her. The yard current, small hands clawing for a branch as icy water dragged her under. "Hold on!" Clara shouted. Ripping off her coat, she plunged into the freezing stream, the shock stealing her breath. But she fought forward, boots anchoring in mud, arms burning as she lunged for the child. "I've got you, sweetheart," she gasped, hauling Junie upward. With one last push, she shoved the girl onto a half-submerged rock. "Stay here. Hold tight." Relief came too soon. Pain ripped through Clara's leg. Her foot had wedged between 2 underwater stones. She yanked, pulled, but the river clutched her like iron. The current dragged, her strength bled away, her chest seized with cold. She tried again, desperate, but her vision blurred, her arms heavy as stone. The last thing she saw was Junie's terrified face before darkness swallowed her. Luke arrived then, the sound of his daughter's screams tearing through him. He dropped his feed sack, heart pounding as he tore through the snow. The sight froze him. Junie sobbing on the rock, Clara's body limp in the current. He charged into the stream, water clawing at his thighs, muscles straining. His arms locked around Clara first, dragging her against his chest. Then he seized Junie with his other arm. "It's all right," he rasped, voice breaking. "I've got you both." That night, the fire roared high. Luke stripped away Clara's soaked clothes with trembling hands, wrapping her in every blanket he owned. He pressed her against his chest, body to body, rubbing warmth into her icy skin. Junie, safe now, curled near the hearth, clutching Clara's shawl as if it tethered her to life. Luke did not close his eyes. All through the long night, he whispered the same words. Rough with desperation, "Stay with me, Clara. Please, don't leave." Her lips were blue, her breaths shallow, but he would not surrender her to the dark. At last, near dawn, she stirred. Her lashes fluttered, eyes hazy, but alive. "Junie," she whispered, voice raw. "She's safe," Luke breathed, brushing damp hair from her face. His hand trembled. "Because of you." Clara's throat worked. I couldn't let her go. I know. His voice cracked. But you nearly died. Her eyes met his, steady, though weak. I'd do it again. Something inside him broke. He pressed his rough palm to her cheek, his thumb shaking. Don't ever leave again, Clara. Don't. Please. Her fingers curled faintly around his hand. I wasn't planning to. And in that fragile dawn, she was no longer the woman he had taken in for a night. She was the woman who had chosen to stay. Clara woke to soft daylight spilling across the cabin wall
Around Clara's neck and whispered fiercely, "You woke up!" Then, as if the words had been waiting on her tongue all along, she asked again, "Can you be my mommy forever?" This time, Clara didn't hesitate. Tears filled her eyes as she pulled the child close, her voice breaking. "Yes, sweetheart. If you'll have me, I will." Junie nodded hard, satisfied, and nestled under the blanket beside her, small hand gripping Clara's tightly. At the doorway, Luke stood silent. He had heard every word. His jaw worked as though to speak, but he stepped outside instead, leaving Clara and Junie in the warm circle of the hearth. Later, Clara rose carefully, still weak, and found him on the porch. Snowflakes drifted soft against the beams, the world hushed and white. Luke leaned on the railing, shoulders stiff, his breath misting in the cold. She stood beside him, the silence between them heavy. At last he cleared his throat, voice low. I didn't send that letter, didn't plan for you, but when I saw you with her, when I heard what you said just now, he faltered, shaking his head. I don't have rings, don't have much but this porch, a fire that doesn't always hold, and fences that still need mending. But if what you need is a place to stay, not out of debt, not out of pity, then I've got that. I've got her, and I'd have you too if you let me. Clara turned, her eyes stinging. Luke, I don't want just a roof. I want a family. For a moment, his guarded face cracked, something tender breaking through. Before either could say more, the door creaked open and Junie tumbled out. Barefoot in the snow, she threw her arms wide and shouted with pure joy, My mommy and my paw! Luke caught her up easily, settling her against his chest. Clara stepped closer, wrapping her arms around them both, and in that simple embrace beneath falling snow, 3 broken souls became one whole family. Autumn returned, softer this time. The cabin no longer stood as a solitary shelter, but as a home filled with rhythm and life. Clara stood in the doorway, one hand resting against the curve of her round belly. Her second child would arrive any day, and though her back ached, her face glowed with quiet contentment. Behind her, Junie's laughter rang through the house as she played with scraps of cloth and wildflowers, her joy bright as sunlight. The cabin had changed too. Luke had built a second room, patched the roof twice, and carved shelves for Clara's jars of herbs and dried roots. A simple sign hung above the porch, Ray and Harrison, herbs and help. At first, townsfolk kept their distance, but slowly, children wandered up to learn their letters from Clara. Mothers came for remedies, and even the old men sought her teas for aching joints. No one whispered half-blood anymore, steady presence without many words. Yet whenever Junie tugged at his sleeve or called his name, his voice turned gentle, softened in a way few had ever heard. On this day, a wedding of sorts took place. Not in a church, not with a preacher, but beneath the wide sycamore where they had once watched Junie dance in the snow. A handful of neighbors gathered, bringing cloth and honey as gifts. Clara wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple cotton trimmed with lace, and braided her hair with a single feather as her mother once had. Luke's hands trembled as she approached, though he had faced down rifles and storms without flinching. He spoke simply. I don't have rings, Clara, don't have a name that's ever meant safety. But I can give you this home, and my word, if you'll have it. Clara took his hand. Her voice was steady, clear. I don't need safety. I just need family. They kissed beneath the tree, Junie's humming filling the air. That night, labor came swiftly. Luke caught their son with hands that had once known only violence, tears running into his beard as Clara cradled the newborn to her chest. You're not a mail-order bride, Luke whispered, his voice breaking. You're my choice. Every day.